When you talk about bumping a player, it's pretty much
great courage. One that says the bump is dead, that's how you deliver it.
What is going on, YouTube universe? My name is Trent. Some of you guys might know me as Zirra from other content I throw out on YouTube. And welcome to my AFL channel, The Hip and Shoulder, where today, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to reflect on round one of the 2024 AFL season with my video podcast, the round recap. Now, if you missed the round recap for opening round, I will link it in the description down below, as well as post a link in the comments. But essentially what the round recap is a discussion video where we cover all the games that went down that week prior. Obviously 4 games in opening round, so it should have been a shorter form video, but these video podcasts are going to be much longer form, especially with rounds like round one where every single team was in circulation for that round. And I do apologize if some of you don't like those longer form videos, but I feel with my knowledge and my passion for the game, I'm going to find myself constantly getting drawn in and waffling on and talking about statistics and, you know, just really deep discussions about what went down over the weekend, because I'm not just a Richmond supporter, I'm an AFL supporter. I watch every single game, every single round, every single weekend, and I love talking about the game. Not just my own team, but every team, and, you know, how the competition is running and, you know, the umpiring or lack thereof and stuff like that. So if these longer form videos don't kind of tick off any boxes for you, I apologize, but for those of you who do appreciate the fact that I'm getting in depth and I'm getting my passion across, that's what this is all about. This is just a platform for myself to discuss all the games that went down, give my own opinions on things, and give you guys the platform in the comment section down below to have your own opinions and discussions as well. There were many that disregarded opening round because of the fact their teams weren't playing, so in that retrospect, a lot of people considered round one the official opening round, and it kicked off, as we have come to expect, with Carlton taking on Richmond at the MCG, two teams that fell under completely different circumstances within round zero. You had Carlton, who looked down and out by half-time and put on one of the best comeback performances I've seen in a very long time to win their game against Brisbane. And then you had Richmond, and the script couldn't have been written any better. Going up to the Gold Coast, taking on a team that historically has had our number for the last couple of seasons, now being led by our premiership hero, Damien Hardwick, and we failed to get out the gates. If Richmond was a horse, we would have been taken out the back, shot and turned into glue. That's how bad our performance was, minus that third quarter effort that brought us back within 4 goals, and I kind of had a little bit of hope, and then that hope got dashed really quickly. I don't want to talk about it. But at any rate, this game came down to less than a kick. Carlton beat Richmond by 5 points in a game that had me on the edge of my seat until the final siren. And it's a game where I think Richmond were incredibly brave, and I was very proud of the effort Richmond put in. And a lot of people might think that it's a little bit convoluted to say that I'm proud of my team losing. But when we get into the nitty-gritty of this game, there are many reasons as to why. First and foremost, Tom Lynch, Dustin Martin, Toby Nankervis all come back into this lineup, and the biggest name obviously being Tom Lynch because he sat 12 months out with that injury. Ryan Mansell came back in as the sub as well. So we had a fresh reset from round zero, came in with arguably our strongest 23 players, I would hazard to say, and they all played a role. Dustin Martin kicked 2 majors and had enough of the ball to be damaging. Tom Lynch, 2 majors, one maybe wasn't deserving because it did come off of a free kick. That shouldn't have been a free kick, but I thought moving around the ground, he looked fit. He was only supposed to play about 75% game time, but he was probably forced to play the full game because of circumstances that followed throughout the game. And Toby Nankervis comes back in, and a lot of people questioned his selection as captain. He had a game-high 8 tackles and a game-high 8 clearances, and when he throws his body into the mix, he is a man built on physicality. When he's not giving away those free kicks that he's, good to give away 1, 2, 3 free kicks a game, he shows that his tenacity is what has garnered the respect of his teammates to vote him into that captaincy role. Ryan Mansell, I think he had a moment that he would rather get back, trying to play on real quickly. Easy goal to kick, hits the post, and in the end, 5 points the difference. Breaks my heart that we come so close, yet it feels like we fell so far. But then, as I said, I hang my hat on the fact of how proud I am of these boys, because when you compare the effort from round 0 to this week, completely different Richmond. And we sustained some pretty major injuries through this game as well. Dion Prestia in the first quarter went down with a hamstring injury. He's good for 1 or 2 of those a year. And I think, unfortunately, he's going to be coming to the end of his career. I wouldn't be surprised if he retires either mid-year to allow a mid-year selection pick, or retires at the end of the year. I don't think he's got any currency on the table to go anywhere else. You know, some rumours speculating he might go back to the Gold Coast. I don't see why that would take him, especially with his body breaking down as it is. The biggest injury out of this whole game, and it broke my fucking heart so much. We've had Josh Gibcus, who is such a talented young key defender. He sits 12 months out with a hamstring injury, goes overseas. I think he went to Qatar, got his hamstring operated on, comes back fit and firing. He has looked good all pre-season. He showed a lot in round 0. He started off this game well, and in the second quarter, he ruptures his ACL, and he's out for another 12 months. He misses the 2024 season, and it is such a blow, because I was so excited to get this kid back, and he's just gone like that, just in a blink of an eye. I really hope he can come back from this, and he can build a solid season behind him. He's got a lot of talent, as I said, and I'm looking forward to getting him back, and hopefully we will see his recovery go well. And then, obviously, at halftime, Tyler Young, prior to halftime, had a head knock. He had passed the concussion assessment at the time, but he fell into Scat 5 at halftime, which means he didn't come back for the rest of the game. Richmond down 3 players, 2 rotations on the bench. Carlton should have ran away with this game. This is a game that they should have been able to, manipulate the circumstances better to their advantage, given that Richmond had players that had to play for longer stints on the ground without being swapped off. They were running, players running on empty instead of being able to get refreshened. And Richmond stayed in the hunt, and the fight was real. Noah Bolter kicked 3 goals as a key forward, and I think he's found his set position, even though I have argued for many years that Noah Bolter will eventually be an all-Australian full-back. Kicks 3 majors and was just so deadly forward of the ball. But then out of necessity, because we had Gibcus and Young go down, he goes back, and he's taking all these defensive marks, and he's rebounding the ball off half-back, and I hazard to question whether he is one of the most versatile young players in the competition right now. He was so impressive. Almost impressive as Nick Vlaston, who I think has not only been best on ground against Gold Coast for Richmond, not at all in that game. I don't think Richmond will get any votes in that game, but Nick Vlaston was our best in round 0. I think he was one of, if not our best, in round 1. And it blows my mind that this guy hasn't got an All-Australian jacket yet. He's been nominated in the 40-man squad, but he has never made the final team. And I think even though it's early days, he's got a strong case to be in the mix already if he can maintain this consistency all year. Carlton, the same people, stood tall. Patrick Cripps, he has 30-plus possessions. 20 of those were contested, in and under the ball. George Hewitt had enough of it, wasn't as impactful as he was against Brisbane, but still found plenty of the ball. Mitch McGovern had a huge game defensively for Carlton, a lot of rebounding from the back 50, a lot of intercept marks. Sard had a solid enough game, rebounding as well. Young, DeConning in the ruck, serviceable, solid. Charlie Curnow, I feel, did not get off the chain as much as I thought he would. Harry Mackay is on sound. He is on track. Whatever he has done this preseason to get his kicking boots back on, he has improved his kicking. Even though we've seen some wayward kicks from him this year, overall, his conversion rate has actually been rather solid, especially that goal that he jammed from outside 50 to get Carlton back the lead at one point during that game. Absolutely huge. Nothing really to report out of this game on a negative front. I had opinions about the umpiring. It got me dragged on social media because in the beginning I thought, apart from the Tom Lynch free kick in front of goal, that the umpiring was pretty solid, but I feel Richmond had a better rub of the green in the first half, but Carlton had a better rub of the green when it meant the most, especially in the last quarter. Liam Baker giving up a 50 that I feel should not have been 50, but then that 50 was almost 60 metres and put Tom DeConning in front of goal. he ended up converting. That extra almost 10 meters obviously is going to play factor. Just consistency. Again, we're just looking for consistent umpiring, and I don't know why in a modern game we don't have technologies in place to ensure that 50s are paid as 50s. They're not short, they're not long, they're paid exactly what they should be. I saw some comments on social media saying that instead of 50, maybe it should be a 25-meter penalty, and, you know, not that big of an advantage, because some of the things that are being paid as 50 these days are very monotonous and very insignificant. But all in all, Carlton get away with their second win of the year, but I feel Richmond take more wins out of this game than Carlton do. I think Richmond supporters can hang their hats on this loss, as weird as that sounds. We got a taste of what Richmond under Uze is going to be like, especially with ball movement. And once we clear up the inconsistencies of our disposal efficiency, I think we're going to be right. There were some players that let us down. Marlon Pickett, don't get me started. Shea Bolton, I don't know why he hasn't gotten out of second gear. Dylan Grimes probably should have retired at the end of last year. But, you know, we do have a young crop of kids, despite what people are saying, to come up and have a chance. And with these injuries, opportunity comes knocking. Friday night at the MCG, we had the reigning premiers in Collingwood hosting Sydney. And again, two teams coming off of different circumstances in round 0. We saw Collingwood go down to GWS in a display that really opened up Collingwood defensively, and I feel genuinely shocked a lot of people, including myself. And then you had Sydney, who came off the back of a rather huge ripping apart of Melbourne's defensive, you know, operations. You know, two teams that pride themselves on defensive pressure and defensive setup, Collingwood and Melbourne, completely fell to shambles in round 0. And unfortunately, it was a tale of that kind of situation again with Collingwood. They allowed Sydney way too much space, and Sydney dominated the contest all night. There was never really a point in this game where I felt Collingwood were threatening to hit the lead or they were going to come back and win. Sydney were just comfortable, and I feel for the most part they really didn't get out of second gear at all. They came out strong and they eased it back a little bit. Collingwood did rally with a couple of goals, but it was never going to be enough to get back in the contest. And a lot of media personnel and commentators are starting to point fingers around Collingwood. They're saying that Darcy Moore isn't living up to his All-Australian best. Young Charlie Dean is apparently not up to standard of the AFL, yet I felt Charlie Dean was probably one of their better defenders on the night. This is a kid that hasn't had much exposure, so I don't understand why the media is so quick to dump these losses onto a young kid who wasn't a part of that premiership, that premiership mold. Ash Johnson up forward, they're hanging shit on him too, which I don't know what else Collingwood can do. They've got Dan McStay that is out injured. They don't really have any other key forwards they can turn to. So obviously they're going to roll the dice and give a player like Ash Johnson a chance. Nick Dacos, 37 disposals for the game, but I felt some of those disposals were junk disposals. He didn't do much with it. And even though he is an incredibly talented young kid, he's a generational player, he's going to win multiple Brownlows, I'll call it now. This kid's going to be the absolute future of the AFL. They reckon he could be the first $2 million a season player, and I think that very well could be the case. But I think what's the point of racking up 37 disposals if they're not going to be effective? A lot of backward handballs, a lot of chipping the ball around. This is a guy that the media drums up as being so effective with the ball, and yet so many of the disposals, especially late in the game, were junk handballs backwards or a little chip kick backwards where he could be more efficient with moving the ball forward. On the other hand, Sydney had players that got absolutely off the chain. Isaac Heaney had one of the best games I've seen him play in a very long time. And again, I spoke about it in the round 0 opening round recap, that have we finally got a position for Isaac Heaney where he can truly relish in the spotlight and show us his best as a mid forward instead of just a forward. But I don't know whether he keeps that spot when these players that are injured for Sydney come back. Taylor Adams, Luke Parker, Callum Mills, Some people suggesting those 3 players aren't part of Sydney's best 22. I can tell you right now, all 3 of them are in that best 22 when fit. They wouldn't have targeted Taylor Adams as a trade prospect if he wasn't best 22. And we know Mills and Parker at their absolute best are elite footballers. But seeing Heaney not only in the midfield and dominate as well as he did there, but going forward and just marking the ball uncontested so easily just shows the defensive breakdown that Collingwood are currently undergoing. Errol Goulden, 30 disposals. His efficiency was a little bit down, but he found plenty of it. Rowbottom had something ridiculous. I'm going to have to check the stats here just to make sure I am running with it, but he had a ridiculous number of tackles. Rowbottom, he had 13 tackles for the game. He was absolutely huge. I love players that pride themselves on defensive pressure, and he was everywhere, this kid. One of the best games I've seen him play. Chad Warner, 3 goals, 27 possessions, 4 tackles, 7 clearances. One of the best games I've seen Warner play since the grand final he played in against Geelong. I thought that he actually could have been in the mix for votes as best on ground for that game, and I know they don't give Norm Smith to losing teams, but if they did, he had that Norm Smith wrapped up for Sydney if they were going to vote that way. McInerney was serviceable. Florent was serviceable. James Jordan, again, a shining light for Sydney. I think his transition to Sydney has been great. Nick Blakey, doing Nick Blakey things off of half back. Brodie Grundy struggled to get into the game a little bit more so than he did in round 1 against Max Gawn, but again, still got the job done. Unfortunately for Collingwood, there weren't many players outside of Dacos that really stood tall and did anything. I mean, Pendlebury had 26, but didn't do much with it. I actually put a tweet out about Scott Pendlebury and noticed in this game that he was under the severe case of the Jack Ginivans. He was leading with the head, rolling the arm, trying to draw head-high free kicks, and I can't remember ever seeing a game where Pendlebury's entire existence for those 4 quarters was centered around playing for soft free kicks. I seriously can't remember. Dacos, in the end, diving for free kicks. I don't know whether it was because they were trying to milk any opportunity they can because the Sydney onslaught was too much to bear, but I think these players are above that shit, and I hate seeing players that have star quality resorting to trying to get the cheap shit. We're going to talk about that in another game in this recap, which I think is a glaring disparity that this rule needs to be changed around. But Sydney were not only impressive against Collingwood, but I think they have well and truly reset the standard for football this year. Saturday afternoon kicked off at the MCG with Essendon hosting Hawthorn. Hawthorn gave it a really hot shake for a long period of time, but Essendon in the end were too good and got their first win of the season. I think, again, a loss that Hawthorn supporters can hang their hats on because they did show glimpses, and had they had kicked straight, I mean, they kicked 17 behinds. Had they had converted a handful of those, they win this game. On that front, there was only a handful of Hawthorn players consistently all game that really stood up. I thought Massimo D'Ambrosio, out of Richmond's VFL team, drafted to Essendon, traded to Hawthorn, his first outing in the Golden Brown, 29 disposals, 4 marks, 2 tackles, had the 1 clearance, but his rebound work off of halfback was absolutely sensational. Warple, 28 disposals, 3 tackles, had 10 clearances, monumental for Hawthorn. Connor McDonald, I thought, had plenty of the ball around the ground. Jai Newcomb, a little bit slower out of the gate, but we know what he is capable of. Weddle off of halfback, I feel, can be just as deadly as Blakey. I think they're cut from the same cloth. They are built within the same mould, and I really rated that one-handed screamer that Weddle took out on the wing. That's my mark of the year so far. A little bit of a highlight for Hawthorn fans when the onslaught from Essendon was getting a little bit too much to bear. Carl Amon was another recruit that I thought really stood tall in the heat of the moment, but Hawthorn, putting them aside, Essendon had a lot of players that really just could not be shut down, and these players were the difference makers in the end. I mean, you had Andrew McGrath, 33 disposals, had 2 tackles, 5 marks, didn't have many clearances though. I think he needs to improve on that clearance work when he is in and around the middle of the ground. Zach Merritt, doing what we've come to expect. 31 disposals total, had 5 tackles, 6 clearances, 8 marks, probably Essendon's best. I would argue he was Essendon's best. Nick Martin played a different role. We thought he was going to be playing off of half-back, but I feel he played more of a wing-based role in this game, and at points disappeared and went struggling a little bit. And this is a kid that came into this year highly touted by a lot of people, so maybe it's just, you know, those first game jitters, get them out of the way, he'll slip back into his systems. But I was really looking forward to seeing him work us up rebounding half-back. I don't know whether things have changed with Ridley now going down and they're trying to restructure that back line a little bit better, but he'll bounce back. I'm confident in that. The player that stood out for me though was Archie Perkins, and he had 24 disposals, very serviceable, but it was the 12 tackles and 8 clearances this kid had that really had him stand tall and break out this game. And if we can see this consistently from him, it's the step forward that Essendon need out of these young kids. And I feel this is a kid that they can build their next generation around. Whether he is consistent enough to show that moving forward, who knows? But I really loved his defensive work this game. It was huge. Final mention I wanted to give out for this game was to Jake Stringer, who I do shit on sometimes, but he kicked 4 majors in the end, played a big part in the difference making of this final margin, because his goals when he did kick them were at crucial points of the game where they needed to hit that front. They needed a little bit of a buffer. He stood tall when needed, and he delivered. As much as I said that I shit on him, I think this was an outcome that was inevitable. I did say I thought it was going to be 50-50 with my tipping video, but I think at the end of the day, we all expected Essendon to perform well here, especially with the acquisitions they made in the off-season. Ben Mackay, Xavier Dersma, Jade Gresham. If I'm missing anybody else, I apologise, but they've gone and targeted specific players. Todd Goldstein, another one that had a serviceable game for Essendon as well. How long Draper gets pushed out of the team for, I'm not sure. I think it's a little bit redundant for Essendon to have a very solid young ruckman in Sam Draper, who has shown that when given the chance, he can do some pretty brilliant things. And you have Todd Goldstein come in and just shove him out of the side. I'd probably find a way to try to see if those guys can coexist. But that's just my personal opinion. But those guys coming in, you'd think Essendon's fortunes would change, and they've got the win now, but can they sustain it moving forward? That's going to be the question. This win actually means Ben Mackay, for the first time in his career, has won back-to-back games. North defeated the Gold Coast last year, at the end of last year, and Essendon winning this game means he has won back-to-back games, first time in his career. But this is a guy that's played almost 100 games and has only won 9 of those. So I think he's laughing. I think he's licking his chops, and he's finally happy that he's going to be playing for a team that should be in the mix to play finals. Should be. But the biggest thing to come out of this game was the couple of suspensions that have been handed out post-game. James Sicily has been hit with a 1-match ban for, I don't know whether it's the kick or if it was I think it was striking that he got booked for. But there was an instance where McGrath looked to go for a hip and shoulder on Sicily after a goal was kicked, and Sicily drops the shoulder, kind of lifts him up off the ground and dumps him rugby style. But as McGrath is in the process of falling from that initial lift, Sicily throws his boot out and tries to fucking Jackie Chan him midair. Not a good look at all. A lot of people saying it's soft, but how can you lift a bloke up off the ground and then try to kick the poor bastard while he's not able to defend himself? Incredibly stupid from Sicily. And if this does stick, they are challenging this at the tribunal, I believe. If found guilty, this will be his 3rd suspension within 10 games. And this is the one thing that stops Sicily from going to the next level. This is the one thing that Toby Green from GWS has dropped out of his game and has made him an infinitely better player. When you drop the bullshit and focus on footy, you can become a million times better. Toby Green's proved it. He was the poster boy for fucking suspensions for many moons. But ever since dropping that act and just focusing on his footy, some people tout him as the best player in the comp, or the most watchable player, the most excitable player, the player that has the most star power. Sicily, however, I don't think will ever be in that conversation because the dumb bastard wants to go out there and do stupid shit every fucking week. Mason Redman's suspension, which he has accepted, probably a little bit more controversial to some, but I think it's a little bit more clean cut. In round 0, we saw George Hewitt from Carlton kind of throw a fist that glanced off of the shoulder of Lachie Neale and connected with the neck kind of underneath the jaw, kind of this area here. He was able to get off of that charge because that hit did glance off of the shoulder and it was not perceived as being an intentional hit. Whereas Mason Redman came double-fisted front on, and I can't remember which player it was to, but the way he did it was because he's pushed front on with his fist, he has made direct contact underneath the jaw, he gets hit with a weak for striking, and I think they know he was in some pretty shallow water because they accepted that penalty straight up. They're not going to fight that. So he misses the next upcoming game for Essendon, which is disappointing because, again, Redman is a very crucial component, I feel, to Essendon's defensive half, and they're already missing Jordan Ridley, and in parts of this game, they did break down defensively, allowing Hawthorn to creep back, especially early in the game. So hopefully this Mason Redman suspension, at least for 1 week, does not bite them in the ass. Later on that afternoon, we had GWS hosting North Melbourne, and this was a game that finished as expected. GWS managing to put on 17 goals for the game against North Melbourne, who were valiant. They kicked 13 of their own, and a little bit closer in retrospect, it was only 39 points the difference. A lot of people would have thought it was going to be much more. Some media experts coming out to say that if GWS were serious, they should put on 30 plus goals. Stupid fucking comment, really. GWS could have put on a hell of a lot more because there were a lot of missed goals in this game, especially from Toby Green, the man I was just talking about. But GWS had, again, the same players standing tall, and some of them are players that I didn't think were going to come out and have as integral a year as they have had. Tom Green, again, best on ground for me, 37 disposals, 9 tackles, 6 clearances, 5 marks. I said before, there is conjecture around the fact that Nick Dacos could be the first $2 million a season player. Tom Green's name is also being thrown in that mix as well. This kid also has a Brownlow in him, and with the way GWS have started, and in my opinion, the way Tom Green has started, he should be sitting on 6 Brownlow votes without question. Best on ground last week for GWS, best on ground in round 0, and I don't think there's any stopping this kid. There is nothing that's going to stop this kid. He is fit and firing. He's shaken whatever injury woes he's had in the past. He's good to go. As long as he can avoid suspension, he's going to give this year's Brownlow a red hot crack. Stephen Caniglio, a player that we know in the past that has been consistently one of GWS's best, finally got back into his best, I feel, in this game. And it's good, I think, for GWS to come up against teams like North because it plays some of their players into form. He had the 30 disposals, he had the 5 tackles, 4 clearances, a lot of score involvements as well. Lachie Whitfield defensively, again, 29 disposals, 8 marks, a huge defensive effort from him. We're finally starting to see some consistency from Whitfield. A lot of people are probably going to come at me and say they only played North Melbourne, that's why they're getting so many numbers. They did it against Collingwood the weekend before, not last week, because last week was round 1. If these players can play at this consistent level, there is nothing stopping GWS from pushing for a grand final this year. And I know we've only seen 2 rounds of football, and it's probably early to be making these calls. But GWS and Sydney in the first 2 rounds have been the most impressive teams to watch. I don't care what anybody says. Toby Green, 4 behinds for the game. This is a game that he really needed to rip apart, and I feel he probably let himself down a little bit in this game. He still had 21 disposals. He had the 9 marks. He got plenty of the ball, but just in front of goal, he failed to deliver. Who didn't fail to deliver, though, was a handful of GWS players. Josh Kelly as a midfielder kicks 2 goals in his 200th. We had Jake Riccardi kick 3 goals. We had young Callum Brown off of a 5-goal haul in opening round. He only kicked the 2. But Jesse Hogan comes out and kicks 6 goals, 2 for the game. And again, ahead of round 0, there was a lot of chatter around the fact that Jesse Hogan is at peak fitness. This is the best he has been in his career, which is weird to say for a 28-year-old player. I think he's 28 or 29, thereabouts. And I've met Jesse Hogan. I know Jesse Hogan. I thought he was going to be the next big thing when he played at Melbourne, and we obviously saw that kind of break down a little bit, but he's finally finding some form. He's leading the Coleman, and he looks very impressive and at home in this GWS forward line. As long as they can keep feeding him the ball while these midfielders are dominating as much as they are, he's going to kick 4 to 6 goals a game easy every weekend. He's definitely one to watch, and I love the fact that not only is he deadly in front of the sticks inside forward 50, he's one of those transitional forwards that pushes up the ground, and he gets plenty of the ball and links up with his teammates down the line. North, though, there are a lot of things to take out of here for North, and I'm in a Facebook group where there's a lot of real genuine AFL supporting people that just love to have a chat and share their passion about the game. And in this group, there are a lot of North Melbourne supporters, so I get an insight into how they feel about North Melbourne and, you know, how they're going about things, which obviously is a team that notoriously for the last few years has been down the bottom of the table. You'd think they'd be a little bit down. You'd think there wouldn't be much passion, but they're lively. They're up and about. They loved what they saw against GWS, despite the fact this was an almost 40-point loss. When you look at the fact that Collingwood put up the same score that North Melbourne did, they're comparing that, you know, saying that if they're able to put on the score that a premiership team was able to put on, they can hang their hat on that fact. You know, they're playing young kids and exposing young kids to the game, and these young kids are standing tall. Harry Sheasel, his second year, 9 marks in the defensive 50, 32 disposals. A lot of people might say that, you know, he's getting junk disposals in the back line by taking in kick-ins and stuff like that, but he is still very composed with the ball. He is given that role because of his use with the ball, and he's just very clean. I'm confident to give the ball off to him because you know he's going to make smart decisions. Luke Davies-Uniacke, 29 disposals. He had 6 tackles. Again, a huge game for him. He's getting back into his systems after having an injury-riddled year last year. Tom Powell looked good. Bailey Scott off of half-back looked good. Speaking of half-back, Colby McKercher on debut had the 22 disposals. He had 8 marks, laid a couple of tackles, and I love the fact that Alistair Clarkson has come in to North Melbourne and he's exposing these young kids off of a halfback role. I don't know whether it's knowing that North Melbourne are going to have the ball up in their defensive 50 more often than not because they are still in that rebuilding phase and teams are going to be kicking a lot of scores against them. But it also exposes kids to the frantic pressure of the game. You know, the ball being up that end means they're thrown into the deep end. They're expected to deliver. We saw Sheasel do it last year. Colby McKercher on debut, in the same mould, looked very composed with the ball coming off of halfback. As opposed to Zach Vischer, who had the 21 disposals, but he was very ineffective with the ball. And we saw in pre-season, he was going to be playing this halfback role, and he looked very much at home, and defensively looked like North Melbourne were going to be rebounding incredibly strong off of halfback. But again, he played a completely different role in this game, and I don't know why Alistair Clarkson flipped, because McKercher was playing on a wing, Fisher was playing off of halfback, but in this game it looked like they swapped, and I don't know whether that's because Clarkson wants to expose young McKercher a little bit more, as again, to the pressure of the game in that role or not, but I did love what I saw with McKercher. He was my pick for the Rising Star this year, and he looked right at home. Another player that I thought played a good game was young, where is he? Dersma. He was on debut for them. 2 goals, 1, only had the 10 disposals, but playing deep forward, you're not expecting huge numbers. But the fact that he was composed enough to go back, kick a handful of goals, he's a very likeable kid. He's got a nice set of hands. He's got a very nice kick. They've definitely found one in Dersma. Larkey kicked 3, and Paul Curtis kicked 2 in a game where, in parts, they struggled for scoring avenues, if that makes sense. But I think that was just lack of getting the ball down to that part of the ground for periods of the game. When North started transitioning the ball a bit better, they looked really good. And again, this is what North Melbourne can hang their hat on. The fact that there were glimpses of greatness from North in this game. And even if it's just a glimpse, it's showing that North are moving in a forward trajectory, as I stumble over my words. But again, GWS, a lot of people are saying are the best team in the comp this year. GWS and Sydney, for me, easily setting the standard country mile. Can't go against that at all. Saturday night saw Geelong host St Kilda in a game where the Joel Selwood stand was unveiled for GMHBA. Thank fuck for that, because we have seen GMHBA in many different stages of its development, and I feel now that it's complete, it feels like a true home of football, even though it is the home ground for Geelong purely and simply. They now have the ability to push for home finals if that is the case. It feels like a place where you want to go watch football now. As somebody external from that club, their ground has never looked like the most desirable ground to go to, but now that it is finished, it looks whole. The aerial views of the place looked sensational. They had more people packed in there, so a bigger house, a bigger crowd. It sounded great. It looked even better. But the game itself, and a lot of people might disagree, a lot of people are going to hate me for it, I feel this was one of the most unwatchable games of football of the round. And even though it was so close a contest, it could have gone either way if either team kicked straight. There was only one or two moments in this game where I looked at it and I thought, oh wow, that was great. Apart from that, there wasn't anything. And it was a monotonous back and forth. You know, it was just a good old slogfest between two teams fighting for a win. And it was an ugly win in the end, because again, it could have gone either way, but it wasn't a game that jumped out to me. And again, that's going to upset some people, and I apologize for that, but I'm just shooting straight. I'm just giving my opinions. Feel free to argue that with me in the comments down below. The one highlight I feel from this game was Jeremy Cameron's goal of the year contender, where he started with the ball on the wing, broke through a contested pack, got the ball off, ran past for the handball, slot it from the boundary line. Very Buddy Franklin-like with the delivery. Outside of that, I can't remember much else about that game, and I can vividly remember every other game over the weekend. And yes, I am including Port Adelaide versus West Coast because I feel there was more memorable moments in that game. It's a weird one. Let me know what you think down below about how these week's games transpired. For St Kilda, Riley Bonner, new recruit from Port Adelaide, put in a brilliant performance. 28 disposals, 3 tackles, 5 marks, playing off of half back. Whether that role shifts when Jack Sinclair comes back and is fully fit, I don't know, but he is looking right at home with St Kilda. On the other halfback flank, Nazaya Wanganeen-Malira, 25 disposals, 5 marks, didn't lay a tackle though, which is very odd because we're normally used to seeing his defensive pressure up and about. Speaking of defensive pressure though, Jack Steele, to me, was probably St Kilda's best on the night. 25 disposals, he had the 7 marks, 9 clearances, 6 tackles. Again, prides himself on that defensive work on his minutes in the midfield. He prides himself on being that lockdown midfielder. He has always been that lockdown midfielder since he got drafted, and he led from the pack strong for St Kilda all night. For Geelong, I feel there were more players in total that stood up tall. You had Max Holmes, who I thought was probably Geelong's best on the night. 23 disposals, 10 marks, 3 tackles. His more defensively lined role within this team suits him really well because his run and dash off of half back is going to help Geelong infinitely. I love it. Dangerfield had 25. He had 6 tackles. He had 8 clearances, just doing Dangerfield things. Mitch Duncan defensively, 11 marks. Huge game for him with his 23 disposals. Tom Stewart doing Tom Stewart things, 22 disposals, 6 marks. Jeremy Cameron kicked 2 goals, 3. Should have really been probably 4 goals on the night, but he had 21 touches as well. So all these players just finding a way to get involved. Rowan Marshall was big for St Kilda, 36 hitouts. He had 5 clearances of his own. I always love seeing ruckmen that can get involved in the clearance work as well and have the ability to get down for the hard-won ground ball. Just overall, some of these players I feel could have delivered more. Max King, 2 goals, 4. We know his marking ability is fantastic, but his conversion ability is shithouse. Combine that with Ben King, who I think his conversion is great, but his marking is almost not up to scratch. If you smash the fucking King twins together, I think you get the ultimate key forward. It's just something he needs to work on to take his game to the next level. Both teams had many passages on the night that really didn't do much. Tim Membry was serviceable with 3 goals. I thought for Geelong, young Oliver Dempsey, who got the round 1 nomination for the Rising Star, had 3 goals for the night, 15 disposals, 7 marks. He's great to watch. Jai Clark didn't really get much minutes. 13 disposals. I would have thought that given in the preseason he showed a bit more. I don't know if it was jitters just in front of a bigger crowd, but I do rate young Jai Clark as a young mid for Geelong. I think with time he's going to grow into a better player. But again, this game, I feel, out of all games over the weekend, is the most easily forgotten about if it wasn't for the fact that GMHBA Stadium was unveiled to the world as now being a complete football experience. And Saturday night rounded out with the Gold Coast hosting Adelaide up at People's First Stadium in the Gold Coast. Fuck know where that is, but Gold Coast got the job done by 6 points in a slogfest, in a hard-fought game, in a game that was very low scoring, in a game that I thought both teams had avenues to make a lot bigger scores. I actually thought this game was potentially going to be a game where both teams came out and kicked 100 plus points, because offensively both of them have enough weapons to get the job done. Gold Coast very well should have won this game by a hell of a lot more, but they were inaccurate and they left the door open for Adelaide. The usual suspects that all stood up in round 0 stood up again for the Gold Coast, and this comes off of the back of me suggesting whether or not all these players could stand up again outside of taking Richmond on, because Richmond historically leak so many easy clearances and easy disposals to opposition midfielders, but they all did it again. Sam Flanders, 35 disposals, 4 tackles, 3 clearances. Noah Anderson, 35 disposals, 5 tackles, 8 clearances. Tuke Miller, 29 disposals, 9 tackles, 10 clearances. Matt Rowell, 29 disposals, 10 tackles, 9 clearances. They were all huge. They were all so impressive to watch. Matt Rowell, I think, best on ground in this game again, and should very well be sitting again on 6 votes. Him and Tom Green leading the Brownlow after 2 rounds of football. Who would have thought? You know, Matt Rowell's back to his best. This is arguably, I think, the best we have seen Matt Rowell since he first debuted in those first 3 games where he went 3 votes, 3 votes, 3 votes, and then got injured. He's been able to get his body right. He's back on track. He's hungry for it. New coach, he wants to impress, and fuck is he impressing, and his teammates are all standing tall. The big disappointment for this game, I think, was Ben King. Had the opportunity to really rip this game open. I thought coming into this game, he would get a hold of Adelaide's defensive 50 and kick 4 or 5 goals. And he had 4 touches for the game. He actually gave up negative meters gained. Didn't kick a score. I can't get my head around it. I really cannot. Malcolm Rosas, he had 2 goals too, but he didn't really get involved in the game like he did against Richmond the week before. Chris Burgess came in for Tex Walker, who didn't play due to a back spasm injury. Didn't score. And he's been one of those kids that have been highly touted around the club as well. Darcy Fogarty did not score. Ben Keys kicks 2 goals. You know, these players that are in here that are expected to stand up tall really did not do it. Sam Berry kicked a goal, had 13 disposals. You know, he's a young kid who's getting more exposure to the game. He's starting to find his feet, but he could have been better. Wayne Malira, 19 disposals, 5 marks. He's starting to get back into it after having many years injured. Isaac Rankin, 2 goals. I feel he could have had more on the board had he had worked up his work rate a little bit better. There were a lot of passengers for Adelaide, but there were a lot of passengers for Gold Coast outside of those main 4 or 5 that I just touched on before. Jared Witts had probably the Falcon of the century. It was the most flush hit to the head I've seen with a football in a very long time, and I laughed a lot fucking harder than I should have. But even then, as I said, with a lot of passengers in this game, it was still more watchable than St Kilda Geelong, especially given that these 2 games kind of clashed on TV. I found myself more inclined to stay on this game than I did with the Geelong St Kilda game. Again, I'm not meaning to upset people if I am with these comments, but again, feel free to tell me what you think about these games in the comments down below. That's what it's there for, to talk about, to discuss, to open communication. I'm wanting to build a very passionate AFL community here on this channel, so please, by all means, let loose. I'm not holding you back. But Gold Coast, 2-0 to start the year, and who would have thought coming into this year, after 2 rounds of football, Gold Coast would be in the top 4. I still think there's room for them to miss finals, but the way they've come out and the way certain players are playing, I think this could be the year they finally push into that top 8. Again, early times. I could be going preemptive, because let's not forget, I said at the start of the year that Adelaide could push for a top 4 spot, and they'd want to be doing a hell of a lot better than what they did in this game if that's going to be the case. Sunday afternoon kicked off at the MCG with Melbourne hosting the Bulldogs. Obviously, we saw Melbourne opened up by Sydney last week, well, the week before, sorry, in opening round. Bulldogs didn't play, so this was their first outing. They got tailed up convincingly. They got done by over 40 points. And if you're going to get done by 45 points, people need to be giving something. We need to see something. Bulldogs have a list where they should not be getting beaten by 45 points. And I'm looking down the barrel at one person, and that is Luke Beveridge. I feel his time at Bulldogs has been well and truly up for a few years now. And the fact that they keep backing this guy, I do not get it. And there's going to be Bulldog supporters that probably do not agree. Unfortunately, I am very hard-nosed on this fact. Beveridge has lost the fucking plot. Last year, he played players out of position, which I think hurt Bulldogs' year. They could have very well played finals last year had he had utilised the players he had to the best of their abilities, instead of seeing Jack McRae in the forward line, Caleb Daniel in the forward line, Bailey Smith in the forward line. You know, play them in positions that we are used to seeing them play at their best. Caleb Daniel as a rebounding half-backman, even though he is tiny, is impressive to watch because his ball use off of that back line is great. Bailey Smith on a wing should be a lock because he can run for days. Jack McRae in the midfield because his in and underwork in the contest is superb. I don't fucking understand. I really do not. And the selection process of this game blew my fucking mind. Jack McRae, he is not injured by all reports. Does not get selected for this game. Caleb Daniel started as the sub. I don't fucking get it. I really do not get putting one of your best players in the sub vest. And to activate that sub, you take off a debutant who actually had a very solid game up until that point. He makes one bad decision that turns the ball over, and he gets subbed off. I don't know whether that decision was made off of that correct, I'm stumbling over my words. I'm so angry. If that sub was made because of that turnover, I would be bitterly disappointed. They need somebody new at Bulldogs running the show. Aaron Norton looks out of sorts. I honestly think Aaron Norton would be better suited at centre half back. Let him find some new facets of his game. He is a strong mark. Use him defensively. Get some intercept marks going. Let him rebound off. Give room for Ugle-Hagan to get out of that forward line and mark the ball. You cannot have Rory Lobb, Aaron Norton, and Jamara Ugle-Hagan running around in the same 50, bumping into each other and fucking spilling the ball all the time. I don't. It's frustrating. But then Melbourne on the other side, to come out strong after being defensively opened up by Sydney, turned the tables around and looked impressive straight out the gate. Even though in the beginning it looked like the Bulldogs had the game under control, Melbourne put the foot down, and there never looked like a spot after that where they were going to have an opening for the Bulldogs to claw back in. Clayton Oliver, best on ground for me, even though the AFL website here, I think, has either gone into meltdown or Mark Robinson has gotten on the beers and someone let him do the statistics, because I don't know how anybody can have half a disposal, half a mark, half a tackle, half a clearance, kick half a behind or half a goal. I don't understand. At any rate, Clayton Oliver had apparently 32.5 disposals, including 3.5 marks. He had 6 clearances and he kicked 0.5 of a behind. I thought he was great, and in the face of adversity, he came out and had a huge game. The Melbourne crowd getting behind him when he came off for a spell, I think, was great. I still have some perceptions about Clayton Oliver. I'm thinking about doing a video on those perceptions. I don't know whether that's going to drum up too much controversy, though, so we'll see how that goes. But he was instrumental for Melbourne on the day. Petrarca, 27.5 disposals, apparently. He apparently had 5.5 marks. He apparently had 2.5 tackles. I'm not making this up. I've got it on screen. You can see that this is match statistics. I don't understand it. Jack Viney, again, 26 and a half disposals, apparently. He had the 6 tackles. I love Jack Viney's defensive work. He is very underrated as a midfielder for Melbourne, and I think outside of Melbourne, not many people give him the credit that he truly deserves. I've seen a lot of people saying he should be in the votes for this game, and people discrediting those comments, I think, don't understand how important a role Jack Viney plays in this midfield. Max Gawn, 20 disposals, 36 hitouts, was plucking marks around the ground, had clearances of his own, back to his best. And after seeing a game where Brodie Grundy convincingly towed him up, it's good to see Max Gawn bounce back the way he did. Again, though, it was the same people for Melbourne that you'd expect to stand up. Outside of that, young Blake Howes, again, very defensively sound, 7 marks. He had 16 disposals of his own. Jamara Ugle-Hagan kicking 2 goals, 3. I felt for Bulldogs should have kicked more. He definitely had opportunity to do so. Billings had a good game for Melbourne. Very effective with ball use, which is great to see. And coming into this game without wearing the vest and having the opportunity to kind of run out a full game, gave him opportunity to show that his skills are what Melbourne target him for. Harvey Gallagher for Bulldogs on debut kicked his opening goal, and it was a very good finish. Van Rooyen for Melbourne kicking the 2 majors. Bailey Fritsch kicked 2, but I thought he didn't really get into the game more than he should have. Again, Aaron Norton, 1 goal, 1. He only had the 6 disposals. He only had 1 mark for the game. Can moving Aaron Norton to the back line help turn his career around a little bit? I think it could, but I think it's something only Bulldog supporters can really talk to me about. So if you barrack for the Bulldogs, let me know what you think down below, because considering he had 6 touches and Caleb Daniel comes on as the sub in the last quarter and has 12 touches, I think it was the last quarter anyway, and he finishes with 12 touches, yeah, that shows to me that Caleb Daniel should not be starting sub. He gets that much of the ball late in the game when the game's dead. Imagine what he could have done for the Bulldogs had he had started the game. I'm going to stop talking about this game here, otherwise I'm going to fucking keep chewing beverage out, and I don't want the taste of him in my mouth. And that sounded incredibly sexual, and I fucking hate that I said it. Port Adelaide hosted West Coast at Adelaide Oval in a game where we knew Port Adelaide were going to win quite convincingly. In the end, it was 50 points the way of Port Adelaide in a game where they had 40 scoring shots, and they should have been ahead of this game a hell of a lot more. You know, they could have easily kicked 25 goals in this game had they had been on, but can't knock the effort of this team. This team looked good. Even though they lost by 50 points, I thought West Coast showed a lot in this game, especially some of their young kids. Harley Reid's debut, I rate. He is a great young talent. It was the first time I've actually seen him operate for a full game. I didn't watch much of his pre-season stuff, admittedly, but he looked at home. He looked good. Whether it was getting the ball out of defense, whether it was working inside the midfield, he had some moments where he was able to break away from packs and clear the ball. Very, I don't want to say it because people are going to drag me, but it was very Judd-like in the way that he was able to break away from those packs. And I know we've only seen him play 1 game and we've got to see how he continues on, but his ability to break away from the Port midfield like he did, if he can have that as a cornerstone of how he plays his football, this kid's going to be elite. But looking at Port Adelaide first, again, the usual suspects of Rosie and Butters getting it done, 27 disposals each. Rosie had the 2 majors for the day, 10 marks, didn't lay a tackle. That's something really odd for Rosie. Butters as well, kicked the 1 major, only had 2 tackles for the game. Again, another player that we know is defensively sound, loves getting in and under. He did have a couple of instances where some big hip and shoulders were laid and he came off second best, but for a little guy, he is not scared to throw his weight around. Ollie Wines, 23 disposals, 2 marks, 3 tackles, 5 clearances, getting some permanent midfield time, looking like he's recapturing some of his better form, maybe in the year that he won that Brownlow, which I'm still kind of shocked he won a Brownlow, and I'm not trying to discredit Wines by any means, but I didn't ever think Ollie Wines, especially at this point in his career, would be marked as a Brownlow winner. But we've seen worse win, we've seen worse win, but it's good to see Wines playing at his best. Ryan Burton out of half back was great. Miles Bergman, 21 disposals but 7 tackles. He was in everything, this kid. I loved his game. Horn Francis, 2 goals, 20 touches, laid to 3 tackles. Houston and Farrell off of half back were great. Willem Drew was great. Young Zirk Thatcher, when he had moments to show what he's what he was drafted for and what he was traded for, he stood tall. He took the 8 defensive marks and he was very good in that defensive 50. Ivan Soldo, first game for a new club, stood tall, and a lot of people reckon he should be in the votes this week. Some players could have had bigger games. Charlie Dixon kicks 3 goals, 3. I thought he should have finished with 5 on the day. Should have ripped the game open, but didn't. There were some other players that really didn't have much impact. Asava Radikalia had the 10 disposals and the 6 marks, but really didn't do much with it. But then again, if the ball's not that up at that end of the ground much, then you could forgive a key defender for not getting involved in the game all too much, considering Alira only had the 13, Darcy Byrne-Jones only had 13. But it was a cohesive 4-quarter performance from Port Adelaide. The memes are already coming around that, it's a little bit unfair that Port Adelaide get to play 2 preseason games in the 1 year. But again, as I said, Eagles had some players that stood tall. I thought Elliot Yeo had a good game, 6 tackles, 20 disposals. Jaden Hunt had the 20 disposals and rebounding out of defence with over 600 metres gained was good for them. McGovern, 19 with 7 marks. Alex Witherden, 18 with the 3 marks, although he turned the ball over a few times, and some people question his selection, but I don't mind him. Co-captain Liam Duggan, when they kicked a goal, even though they were so far down, just seeing them get around him was great to watch. Harley Reid, on debut, 16 disposals, 2 marks, 2 tackles, 5 clearances. As I said, when he broke away from those packs with those clearances, he looked really impressive. It was always going to be a game where he might have struggled to get his hands on the ball because of the players he was up against, but he found a way to stay in it. And I don't think it's going to be all doom and gloom from West Coast, because early on in this game, they really took it to Port Adelaide. I think it was then a young, inexperienced team struggling to keep up with a team that's premiership contending. But West Coast showed glimpses. They showed some glimpses. It was actually, as a neutral supporter, it was actually good to watch a game where West Coast actually showed something. And the final game of the round saw Fremantle hosting Brisbane over at Optus Stadium in a game where in the end, Fremantle ran away with a 23-point win in a game that I thought Brisbane might have actually rocked up and did a little bit of damage. But after a quarter-time deficit that saw Fremantle down and Brisbane large and in charge, Fremantle came out, went bang, 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 and did not look like they were ever going to drop this game. And there was some huge performances that carried Fremantle to this win. Caleb Sarong, 46 disposals, 6 marks, 7 tackles, 10 clearances, best on ground, 3 Brownlow votes, lock it in. 46 disposals is now the highest disposal count by any Fremantle player in club history. I believe back in 2001, I'd have to check my stats, but I think it was 2001, Peter Bell set a record with 44 disposals, which I think was tied by Mundy in 2016, I want to say. But Sarong was on point. He looks fit and firing. A lot of people are saying he's a Brownlow Smoky after one game. I've always rated Sarong, but if he is coming out with this level of game, holy fuck is he dangerous. Nobody could stop him. And Brisbane are a team that have players that can play that clamp down role, and they could not stop this kid. Luke Ryan defensively. I said in my Supercoach video that apparently Luke Ryan had said he can't kick more than 40 meters and he was going to struggle to move on the ball. What a load of shit. He has 33 disposals, 10 marks, 817 meters gained. This bastard can flog the fuck out of a football, and he was on all game. Andrew Brayshaw, 32 disposals, 5 tackles, 6 clearances. James Aish, he had 26. Hayden Young was forced to go back after an injury took out Oscar McDonald, but he had 24 with 10 tackles. They collectively looked very good. Forward of the ball for Fremantle, Luke Jackson, playing a ruck forward role, kicks 2 majors. We had Josh Tracy, 3 majors for the game. Michael Walters only kicked the 1. Jaya Miss kicked 4 goals. Brennan Cox kicked the 1, but he's potentially out for, I think I saw something along the lines of 12 to 14 weeks because he needs an operation on a hamstring. I want to say it was a hamstring. 12 to 14 weeks he has gone for, which is very upsetting because I rate Brennan Cox as a player. For Brisbane, Josh Dunkley again had a great game. 26 disposals, 8 tackles, 9 marks, 4 clearances, doing what Dunkley does best. Jared Lyons was split open in the opening moments of the game, and I thought he would not recover, but he ended up having 25 disposals, 6 marks, 3 tackles, 4 clearances of his own. At his age, and the fact that he struggled to break into this midfield group with Lachie Neale not playing, I think it's opened opportunity for him to come in, but it's good to see him back in circulation and winning a lot of the ball. Hugh McCluggage, 23 disposals, 7 marks. Dane Zorko was a little bit more quiet, kicked the one major, had 21, took 8 marks and 4 tackles. Nat Fyfe, I thought, had a really good game. 21 disposals, 7 tackles, 6 clearances. Nat Fyfe back playing full-time midfield minutes is the best thing for Fremantle. It really is. They wasted him in the forward line. He's come back fit. He's found his place back in the midfield again. Could this be the year Fremantle finally bounce back into finals contention? I'm not going to say the P word, but I'm going to say the F word. And it's not fuck, it's finals. I think him back in that mix is going to be very critical for Fremantle. And Jeremy Sharp, traded in from the Gold Coast, had the 18. He took the 8 marks, laid a tackle, slipping into their systems, looking good. I honestly thought this game was going to be ripe for the picking for Brisbane. Fremantle just showing that they're up to the challenge, and can they make Optus a fortress for them this year? Who knows? So all in all, a comprehensive round of football. There wasn't really anything to draw on like I did last week with umpiring decisions or anything like that. We've already spoken about some of the suspensions that have happened. Another thing that I noticed this week, a couple of people got hit for were headbutts. Malcolm Rosas headbutted somebody from Adelaide, and in the video footage of that headbutt, the headbutt was that forceful that it knocked the mouth guard out of the player straight out of his mouth. So he's been hit with a week. James Harms got hit for a week against Stephen May for headbutting as well. It's just stupid shit. I don't know what players think when they start doing that stuff, because they know they're going to get done for it. Umpiring in general, again, as long as we see consistency in deliverance of free kicks, I can understand. I think the most glaring free kick that I failed to talk about before that I can touch on now is the taking out the legs free kick. And obviously, we've seen in the past players diving for the ball, taking out the legs of the opposition. We have seen players have broken legs because of that. I believe Gary Rowan had his leg broken when he played for Sydney for that particular instance. And that was part of why that rule was brought in. And I think Patrick Dangerfield has made a mockery of that ruling with the fact that Liam Stocker from St Kilda was first to the ball. I wouldn't say he dove for it. I'd say he more so stumbled trying to get the ball. Dangerfield had very little contact made to him. I actually feel Dangerfield leapt over Stocker and barreled himself over instead of being taken out, and the free kick was paid. And I don't think that's a free kick. It ended up with Stocker being injured because of that hit. I don't understand. If anything, you'd think because Stocker was first to the ball and then contact was made, it should have been a free kick to Stocker. In that game as well, we saw a very rare instance of Rowan Marshall going to a ruck contest without his shoe, threw the boot out of the way so he could ruck, and then Graham Myers walks over, picks up the boot and yeets it. Umpire blows his whistle, tells the umpire to hold the ball to throw it back in, but gives Rowan Marshall time to put his boot on. Historically, we have seen that paid as either a free kick or a 50-metre penalty. I remember Ferrito from North Melbourne yeeting a boot away, gave away a 50. I remember only last year, I think it was, Charlie Cameron did it and gave away a free kick. A lot of people saying that it's not a free kick because it's Geelong. I've got reservations about that as well, but hey, so be it. But again, it's just consistency we are looking for, and I think there is still a lack of it. And while we're seeing more loosened interpretation and a little bit more freedom in some aspects of the game, I feel some need to be tightened up on. And this whole taking out the legs and over-exaggerating contact to get free kicks, or trying to milk free kicks like we saw from Pendlebury with rolling the shoulder still to get head highs, or diving deliberately. We saw Dacos get a free kick against Sydney for driving with the head, trying to say that he got caught head high, but the replay showed there was no head high contact at all. We just need to find a common ground. That is all I'm saying. But all in all, this round, apart from a couple of instances, was actually pretty clean, and it was a good round of football to watch. Which leads me to the Hip and Shoulder MVP award. So if you missed the first round recap, I'm going to be doing a 3-2-1 vote system for every game, and at the end of the year, there's going to be an MVP award given out to the player that has the most amount of votes, and because they don't know this channel exists and they're not going to give a fuck, they probably won't care. But I'm still going to do it because I love this game, and I love doing something like this just to keep myself and you guys actively involved in the process, doing something a little bit fun. As I established in the round 1 recap, every game is going to have a stiff to miss list where 1 or 2 players that didn't make the 3-2-1 vote is going to get mentioned, and I'm always going to start with those ahead of the 3-2-1 vote. So Carlton versus Richmond Thursday night, my stiff to miss was Mitch McGovern from Carlton. Defensively sound all night, very stiff to miss, but I think the 3 that I have named did have bigger games for their clubs respectively. And again, these decisions I make are objective, and I know some of you are going to disagree. So again, this opens point for discussion. If you disagree, if you agree, if you've got some different people you want to throw up, let me know in the comments down below. It's what it's there for. But my 3 votes for this game and best on ground for the Carlton-Richmond game, I gave to Patrick Cripps. 30 plus possessions, 20 of those were contested, was an absolute bull all night. Again, Richmond's midfield allowed that kind of ball winning to happen. However, he was able to make opportunity of it every single time he could, and he was easily Carlton's best player on the night. My 2 votes goes to Nick Vlaston from Richmond, who I said earlier I rated his game a little bit more ahead of Bolter's, only because I feel, especially in the early part of the game where Nick Vlaston was down back by himself, his interceptability has saved more goals than naught this year, and we could have been opened up a hell of a lot more early in the game if it wasn't for his influence in the back line. That's why I'm giving him 2. And my 1 vote goes to Noah Bolter. Kicks 3 goals as a key forward. Gibcus and Young go down. He goes back into defence. He's plucking intercept marks. He's moving the ball on long. Mr. Versatility picks up my 1 vote for the game. Friday night, Sydney versus Collingwood. My stiff to miss, and it could be a little bit controversial, I don't know. I'm going with James Rowbottom from Sydney, and I originally had him in the 1 vote slot. I just am going to give the 1 vote to somebody else. Having the 12 tackles on the night was huge, but I think the players ahead of him in this list had more influence with use of the ball in hand for a bigger amount of time. My best on ground, and it's no hard feat here, Isaac Heaney was in absolutely everything, kicked a handful of goals, had plenty of opportunity to get, the ball from defensive half to forward half. His midfield minutes were capitalised upon and then some. The marks inside 50, uncontested, kicking the ball flush, best on ground by a country mile. Chad Warner from Sydney gets my 2 votes, 3 goals, collected a huge amount of the ball as well. Very damaging. He's actually looked really good for Sydney in the opening 2 games as well. And again, as I said, a couple of years ago in that grand final, if you were going to give the Norm Smith to the losing team, he was their best player. And Chad Warner is one of those players since that I feel has dropped a little bit on morale since that hiding they copped in that grand final. So it's good to see him bouncing back to his best, especially when Sydney need it. My 1 vote, which was going to go to James Rowbottom, has been shifted to Nick Dacos, and the more I thought about it, the more I spoke myself into giving it to him. 37 disposals, even though I feel some of them in the end were junk disposals, you still can't deny this guy's input on the ground. He still lifted his team when it was required. I feel he was one of the only Collingwood players that gave a 4-quarter performance, and I've got to give him a vote just based upon his input in the game. Was he as influential on it as Warner, as Heaney? No. Do I feel he was a little bit more influential than Rowbottom? Collectively over the 4 quarters, yes. I think there were moments where Rowbottom looked better, but I think as a whole, Dacos was the better player of the 2, so that's why I swapped him. Moving on to Saturday afternoon with Essendon taking on Hawthorn. My stiff to miss, I've got Andrew McGrath from Essendon, and I've got Massimo D'Ambrosio from Hawthorn. I loved D'Ambrosio's use outside of defensive 50. He looked very clean. He looks at home. Obviously, playing against his old team, he wanted to stand tall, but I think they've really got one with D'Ambrosio. I'm spewing Richmond never picked him up because he was in our VFL system, and we could have drafted him in the mid-season draft, but we let him slip to Essendon. Andrew McGrath had plenty of it, but the players I'm going to give it to, again, I think more influential, and that's why he's stiff to miss. 3 votes, I said it earlier. Zach Merritt, I think, was best on ground for Essendon. Plenty of the ball, captain, led the charge. He's very underrated as a midfielder. I feel there's not enough people talking about Zach Merritt. And he's still reasonably young too, which still shocks me at his age. A lot of people think he's a lot older than what he is, and you'd probably be mistaken for thinking that. But yeah, he's always one to watch for me. I love watching Zach Merritt go about it with Essendon. My 2 votes is going to Archie Perkins. Breakout game, monster amount of tackles, got a lot of the ball. As I said, he is a player that this club can build around. I'm keen to see him get more midfield time. I'm keen to see whether he can back up this performance. He was incredibly good in this game. And the 1 vote, Jake Stringer, 4 goals, influential when they needed him, had plenty of the ball around the ground as well. I give him shit. Andrew McGrath could have very well had the 1 vote, but I've got to swallow my pride here, and I'm giving the 1 vote to Jake Stringer. Moving on to GWS taking on North Melbourne. My stiff to miss was Lockie Whitfield from GWS. Again, a huge defensive game from him. And Harry Sheasel from North Melbourne. Plenty of the ball, very composed. Love how Shari? I need to stop recording later, but not time. But Harry Sheasel and Lockie Whitfield are my stiff to miss for this. 3 votes, and I don't think it comes to any surprise. Tom Green for me, best on ground, 3 MVP votes, 3 Brownlow votes. 37 odd possessions I think he had, and he looks so good. He loves the contested ball, brings his teammates into the game. I love seeing him fit and firing, and I'm still very upset that Richmond could not push harder to get him. But we won't dive into that. My 2 votes goes to Jesse Hogan. 6 goals, could have been more, but I love how he's going about it this year. I was a little bit stupid last week, leaving Callum Brown out of the votes with 5 goals, so I'm not going to be stupid this week, and I'm making sure Jesse Hogan's in there. And my 1 vote goes to Stephen Coniglio. It's been a while since we've seen him at his best, and this was one of those games where he was at his best, and it needs to be acknowledged. Geelong versus St Kilda. I have 4 stiff to miss. Oliver Dempsey, Mitch Duncan, and Jeremy Cameron from Geelong, as well as Riley Bonner from St Kilda. We could have raffled them all for the 1 vote. Unfortunately, not good enough to get there. I'm giving best on ground and 3 votes to Max Holmes from Geelong. I loved his run and dash off of half back. I rate him as a player. One of those players that was stiff to miss the grand final premiership win due to that hamstring. Playing a new role. Some people struggle with it. He's relishing the opportunity. I thought he looked great. 2 votes for me goes to Jack Steele. A defensively sound midfield game where he really established, I felt, his dominance, and as a captain, this is the way you want your captain to lead, and I'm glad to see him going about his work and continuing on his 2023 form, at least when he was fit and he wasn't out injured. And the 1 vote goes to Patrick Dangerfield. I mean, he probably gets 1 vote at the Oscars for the dive, but apart from that, you can't deny it, even though he's getting older and the best is past him. Danger is danger. He does magical things, and he was good enough to get the 1 vote this week. Gold Coast taking on Adelaide. Stiff to miss for me. From the Gold Coast, we have Noah Anderson, and that speaks volumes because Noah Anderson played a huge game. And Matt Crouch from Adelaide. Again, a player that has found himself in and out at Adelaide for whatever reason, but I thought he had a really good game for Adelaide on the weekend. My 3 votes, again, comes at no surprise, goes to Matty Rowell. Best on ground again. I think him and Tom Green, as I said at this point, would be leading the Brownlow 6 votes apiece. He was very impressive. Had a monster amount of clearances, monster amount of disposals, but his defensive work inside with all those tackles makes him such a complete player. I love it. 2 votes goes to Sam Flanders. I thought he really stood tall in this game. He's one of those players that, again, people were uncertain about the role he was going to play, but the role he's playing, he's comfortable in it, and he's looking good. And my 1 vote goes to Rory Laird from Adelaide. Again, he just went about the game he does. He got plenty of the ball himself. He also had 10 tackles for the game, and I can't discredit somebody who hits the ground running as hard as Rory Laird does. Hits hard offensively, hits hard defensively, and I think had a complete game. The stiff to miss for me was Christian Petrarca. Some of you might think that's blasphemous, especially given when I say who my 1 vote goes to. Petrarca was good, but I think these 3 teammates of his were better because I don't have a Bulldog on this list. Clayton Oliver for the 3 votes. Can't go past a 35 disposal game, especially with the adversity he's had to face. found plenty of the ball, got his teammates involved. Very selfless in the last quarter, marked the ball inside 50, could have easily just gone for a shot himself, chipped it off to a teammate that was close to the goal to get them involved. Always good to see a selfless act like that go down, especially when you're 40-odd points up, so good work to Clayton Oliver. 2 votes goes to Max Gawn. Huge bounce back from the week that he had against Grundy. Asserted his dominance in this game against Tim English, who is one of the elite ruckmen of the competition. Marked the ball around the ground, plenty of clearances on his own. Good to see Maxi Gawn at his best. And my 1 vote again goes to Jack Viney. And I've already established already, and I think it's going to be a common trend. I love midfielders who have a defensively sound game. I love midfielders that aren't just about trying to break away from packs and get easy clearances. You know, hang at the back of packs to get a cheap handball. Jack Viney is one of those in and under midfielders that is very underrated, and again, had a monster amount of tackles for a midfielder. I love it, and I'm giving him 1 vote. And I know people are going to hate that. I don't give a fuck. Moving on to Port Adelaide versus West Coast. My 2 honourable mentions are Dan Houston from Port Adelaide and Ivan Soldo from Port Adelaide as well. Both of them had very influential games for Port, but I think these 3 played just a little bit better. Connor Rozee gets the 3 votes for me. 2 majors, plenty of the ball around the ground, plenty of marks, score involvements, led the way as captain. I forgot that he actually changed his jumper number. I was looking for number 20 and forgot he now runs around with the number 1. I'm an idiot. His partner in crime, Zach Butters, gets the 2 votes. These 2, I think, are going to be something to watch for Port Adelaide for many years to come. I love both of them. I've loved them since they were drafted. They're finally finding their feet. They're asserting their dominance. It is great to watch. And the 1 vote for me, Miles Bergman, didn't have as much as the ball as they did. Maybe just a few disposals less. But I thought when he had opportunity to shine, he shone incredibly well. He got some score involvements on the board, plenty of tackles again, and it was a game where even early on when it was contested and West Coast was still in the hunt, Bergman was one of those players that was in and under trying to push that ball forward, and I absolutely loved his game. Final game of the round, Fremantle taking on Brisbane. My stiff to miss, Nat Fife from Fremantle, huge game for him, and Josh Dunkley, again, huge game for him. And I don't always give votes to players that are defensively sound, because Josh Dunkley was, but he didn't make the top 3, so you can't use that against me now. 3 votes clearly was Caleb Sarong. Nobody came close to being best on ground like he did. Luke Ryan, 2 votes, easy done, and then the 1 vote was Andrew Brayshaw. Those 3 were comprehensively the best 3 on the field, I felt, and could not look past them. Another stiff to miss, now that I think about it, is maybe Jaya Miss with 4 goals. But I loved the work of those 3 in tandem. So looking at the MVP leaderboard, we have a tie. Top of the ladder, 6 votes apiece, Tom Green, Matt Rowell. Second place, Isaac Heaney with 4 votes. And then we have the tie all the way down to 13th place, I believe, if I've counted correctly, with Jack Viney, George Hewitt, Brodie Grundy, Clayton Oliver, Patrick Cripps, Caleb Sarong, Connor Rozee, Max Holmes, Zach Merritt, and Nick Dacos, all on 3 votes apiece. Normally I would turn here to social media comments, but I haven't had any this week. It's been a little bit upsetting. You guys have to reach out. So do let me know if you do watch this video in the comments down below. Any thoughts you had about the round, any questions you would like to ask myself, make them heard. Let them be seen. So when it comes to this portion of the video, I've got something to talk about. But that's it for this video. Thank you for taking the time to join me. Again, another long form one. I do apologize, but I do love what I do, and I do hope you guys appreciate what I'm doing. If you are, hit that like button down below, because it does go a long way to helping YouTube identify the fact that what I do is being enjoyed, and get on board by hitting that subscribe button as well. As I said, I'm looking forward to building a strong community here, and I would love for you to get on board. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.